Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2023 virtual Great Lakes Fishing Show. We are on the floor of the Greater Niagara Fishing and Outdoor Expo. We're going to be talking Great Lakes fishing for the next 2 hours. We'll be back on this afternoon. It'll be 6 o'clock Eastern. We'll be right back here in the same spot talking more Great Lakes fishing. We're honored to be joined today by Captain Vince Pierleoni. How you doing, Vince?
Great to see you, Chris.
Well, I saw you show up this morning, so you've been at the show basically all day today. What do you think of the show so far?
I tell you, for being shut down for a few years due to COVID, looks like it's bounced back very well.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement in the room. I think people are excited. There's a couple different things going on. We've got some pretty good weather. Obviously, today we got some snow, but it's been warm. So I think people are thinking fishing already. You don't have that ice in the lakes yet, so people are already thinking about getting those boats out, even though we're in mid-February.
Yeah, when conditions allow, people are actually getting on Lake Ontario too. Our biggest battle this year has been watercolor. There's been so much wind pounding the shoreline of not only Lake Ontario but Lake Erie, and that's given us a lot of turbidity to deal with. But certainly has been a warm winter.
Have you been out yet this year, just yourself fishing, doing some fishing?
Have not been out. Normally I run a semi-steady schedule in the Niagara River, but in the winter, most of the clients want to go later in the week and weekends, and it just hasn't been lining up with the storms we've been getting. When you get a cold snap and then you get a 60-degree warm spell, and with that comes those 40-mile-an-hour southwest winds, and it just hasn't been productive to be on the water yet. But we're looking forward to a good early spring on the big lake, and at least when we're on Ontario, we can escape that, because of the depth of the water. The entire lake doesn't become muddy, but we're certainly expecting a good early bite this year.
And you're based out of Olcott, New York. Talk to our folks here in the audience about where Olcott is and just how that sets up on the lake.
So Olcott is to the western end of the lake. It's approximately 18 miles from the Niagara River. And I like to think that it has the benefits of the Niagara flow without too much of the negative, which for people that don't understand how it works, the Niagara River can produce warm water in the spring because Lake Erie is a shallow lake, and it absorbs heat and it warms up a lot faster than Lake Ontario. So the Niagara River will flow into Lake Ontario and become a magnet for bait fish and also the cold water species that will be attracted to that 39, 40, 41 degree water earlier than the rest of the lake. So it becomes a magnet early, and then as the summer goes on, sometimes the fish will move off of there because it is so warm, but it'll spread the habitat out, but all season long, that flow attracts bait fish. And that flow runs down the coastline to the east from the river before it really spreads out all the way to 30 Mile Point. So in approximately 30 miles of a band of that water that's attracting bait fish all season long. So we have, steady summer fishing as well.
With that warm water later in the year, kind of pushes some of those fish a little bit offshore just because they don't want to be in the warmth. Is that because you said you're getting the positive but not so much the negative in Olcott?
So as the summer wears on, if you got a real warm summer, it's dumping a lot of warm that drop out there. So there's just competing with that, and then you've got Valentine because it's so warm and productive, that water. So it's just easier to stay away from that area at certain times. Now, as the summer wears on, you get toward the end of the summer. Return there and do the spawning run.
So talk to me a little bit about how your season sets up when you get started, kind of what you're targeting early on, and just how the season progresses throughout the year.
So first thing, what we call ice out, whether we got ice or not, we're getting going by very early April, and we're always expecting to get brown trout and lake trout. They're very raring to go in the beginning of the spring. The lake trout are not bothered one iota of temperature. I mean, we'll catch them in 33, 34 degree water. They're looking for early bait fish. They're eating gobies, and we usually find them from 40 to 150 foot of water, and they're heavily feeding. And then the brown trout are not too shy to go into shallow water, which is running a lot warmer because it's closer to the bank and in the plumes from the creeks and the rivers. So they're attracted to that warmer water primarily because the bait fish are. And then their activity and their metabolism speeds up being in that warmer water, and you end up with a steady bite.
You guys have questions. We're talking with Captain Vince Pierleoni. Vince will be with us for the next couple hours. If you've got questions for Vince, go ahead and put them in the comments. We'd love to answer them. Vince is a charter captain out of Olcott, New York, which is, I guess you're just east of Wilson, which is straight north of us. So you're kind of, what would you say, 30 miles, 40 miles northeast of us here in Niagara?
Yeah, it was about a 35-minute drive. But as far as Lake Ontario goes, it's 18 miles from the mouth of the Niagara, and then it's about 5 miles east of Wilson.
And when things get going there in May, what are you targeting out there? I know it's kind of a mixed bag because the whole lake kind of comes to this area to eat. I mean, it's a feeding ground. Tell us about what a day on the lake is like that time of year.
So we start seeing cohos show up in our fishery toward the end of April. And an odd king here and there and what I feel it is they're with those alewives in the winter. So as more and more alewives start making a movement towards the shallows, those fish move in with that bait fish movement, but they also discover that there's warmer water in there. And so their metabolism's starting to crank, and more of them find it, and then you end up with congregations of pockets of salmon. Not just coho, but Chinooks. And in a typical day in May can vary day to day, but there's some days where it can be all Chinooks, king salmon as they're known. And they rarely go into a shallower water as the brown trout will. So they're usually found in 40 to 200 foot of water overall, and then they're going to be usually suspended. You know, there is times where they're on the bottom, because that's where their food's found, or the pressure's been heavy on them, like during a derby. A lot of times they'll push the fish down. But for the most part, they're up and active, and they're feeding in water that's 40 degrees and up, because they spent the whole winter in 39-degree water, which is on the bottom of Lake Ontario.
So what does that look like? How are you targeting them? What does your spread look like that time of year? You're going after kind of a mixed bag type of fishery.
So you kind of got to have a feel for the species that are present. So we would expect to catch Chinooks on our downriggers and on our dipsies, and depending on the level they're at, we'll run inline boards. We'll run ninja boards with flat lines if there's a lot of coho around early. And then as the season progresses, that may drop to 5 color, 7 color, 8 colors of lead core. But you'll pick off king salmon with that too, because they will, especially out away from the boat, they will feed up, higher in the column. And that is the warmest water available too in May. It's always going to be the top 20, top 30 foot. That's the warmest, but we're still catching Chinooks 40 to 150 down, depending on where the bait fish are.
So you may be running like 500 coppers and long lead core lines.
You may. Again, as a charter boat, if we're able to stay busy without implementing those things, then that's probably what we're going to do, because that's a slow road to China there.
Right.
If you're catching on downriggers, divers, and shorter cores, then we're going to emphasize that, because quite frankly, those are deadly tools, but if you're making it harder on yourself and harder on the clients to get the fish in, you're just slowing yourself down.
Right. You want to get out there, you want to create excitement for your clients and get them excited about fishing. And you're reeling in that 500 copper with the big Chinook on it, you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah, when it starts getting up to 500, 600, we call it farm equipment.
Right. Yep.
It's doing the heavy labor.
It's a lot of dragging. The other thing you're doing this weekend is the salmon school here with Latza, and that's kind of the big thing about the show. If you haven't been to this show, it's really education focused. There's seminars all over the place, and Trevor, who owns Fishhawk, who's been here with us this weekend, he actually said, "Hey, I'm going to go watch a couple of seminars while you guys are doing the show." So there's a lot of just really, really good stuff here. If you are trying to get into fishing, trying to learn more, you got guys like you here, and really the top guys in fishing in this area are all right here in this spot. You're doing seminars, you're doing this school. Tell us a little bit about this school.
So the school was a brainchild of Latza and Joe Yeager, the president of Latza, and it got started in a much smaller facility in Lockport, New York, and the popularity of it simply outgrew the facility. And when they moved here to the convention center, he wanted to keep the school going as part of the show, and it really gives people that are going to travel from surrounding states and or Canada the ability to come to the salmon school and still be able to come to the show in one location. So it makes it very convenient once they're here, and there is really something for everybody. I mean, there's just as many walleye seminars this year as there is salmon seminars, and they've done a fine job growing that and coordinating that. But they really, really wanted to put a heavy emphasis on education and, to help the sport maintain and grow. And I think they're doing a good job of it.
So it's basically all day tomorrow. What does that look like? What does the day look like? You kind of give us a rundown of, if I'm going to sign up and show up at the door, what's my day going to be like?
So the salmon school is sold out. They do advanced ticket sales. It's grown so much now that they actually do a Friday night social where there's two other speakers besides myself for the all day session tomorrow. We'll actually give a little overview on our seasons, and then we'll touch on some things maybe that are important to us that won't be part of the program tomorrow, and then get to know some of the attendees that could make it tonight. Tomorrow is the big day. I think we're getting started around 8 o'clock, and we don't finish up till 4. There is a lunch break, but again, all the tickets have been sold for that event. But there are classes going on all through the day tomorrow and Sunday for not just trout and salmon, but walleye, like I mentioned. So there is something for everybody, and there is beginner classes. I know that for a fact. So people that might be intimidated by a lot of the things we've been talking about could get in those beginner classes and start to have an understanding.
Well, that all-day school, though, I mean, you got some time there. You've got 7-8 hours to talk to people. How in-depth do you get with that? I mean, what does that look like, the curriculum throughout the day?
So we expect this to probably be the most in-depth that there's been yet, because there's been probably 14, 15 years of these now. So they are touting it for advanced students. That being said, every year we're prepared for not leaving anybody behind, because maybe they're a little bit more limited. So we're able to take care of, I think the way they've structured it is there'd be time for a few questions after every category we cover. But if someone's really missing the entire message because of something, then they'll be able to be allowed to ask that question. But then again, because of the sheer size of it, we're also going to have a question and answer short session on Sunday morning in case someone leaves without really what they came for. So
one of the things that you brought up a few questions ago, you said you go back and talk about last year's season. What was last year's season like? And then I also am really curious as to what your notes look like. I mean, what do you track throughout the year, and how do you use that to become a better captain?
So I do take a lot of notes. My notes They are helpful for day to day because the trends change. So you can't really look at August 20 notes for the last 4 years and decide how you're going to attack the fish, how you're going to find them, what you're going to present. You really can't do that because so much can change. The season itself can unfold in a different way. You could have a lot warmer water than you had years prior. You could have a lot colder water. You might have a complete flip over of the lake. So you have to have your fundamentals down on how to start your day. But they can help if you recognize that conditions are similar. Salmon are on the mature salmon they have an agenda of eat, grow, and spawn. So there are some predictabilities to what they do, and as long as the weather hasn't thrown a wrench in everything, there are some things that we can expect based on the calendar. So that's where the notes can come in. They also come in when I visit other locations, which we fish at least 10 tournaments a year. We're traveling all over the lake, and being that we're not in our home water, the notes you take from a prior year can be beneficial. So they give you a starting point, and you can play off of that.
All right, we do have a question coming in. This is on Browns. It's from Jim Lemon on Facebook, and he says, can brown trout be caught in the muddy water from runoff? And I know you talked about that a little bit earlier, and it's something that when you walk around this room and you talk to people who are on the lake all the time, they're saying it's a big problem right now. You're seeing a lot of dark water out in the lake right now.
So there's so many different degrees of mud. It's some of us can look at it and determine if we should even spend any time in it. It's actually beneficial to have color in the water when you're fishing for brown trout because they're not afraid to go into shallow water and actually do a lot of their spring feeding in shallow water. So we like colored water. If it's too turbid, it actually, it bothers them a little bit, inhibits their breathing, and makes it very hard for them to locate our lures. That being said, brown trout are one fish that can be caught in muddy water, and it's just some fundamentals of dirty water fishing. You want to use colors that are more visible in mud. You want to push it as shallow as you can get without hitting bottom, because they're going to push it as shallow as they can to see the lures. They will also move outside the mud. Depends on the temperature. If it's very, very cold water, they may not do that. But if the water temperature isn't much different, there's going to be fish on the outside edge where it actually mixes. So that will be colored water, but not super muddy. So that's two ways to attack it. But if you're going to fish in the muddy water, it's noticeably warmer. There's bait fish present. There's most likely brown trout in that water. You're going to want to use loud colors unless the sun's out overhead. The sun's overhead, middle of the day. A lot of times metallic colors can still be good. We like gold in that condition. Bright sun, dirty water. Gold is an alternative to running like a loud chartreuse plug. Browns aren't known for liking bright orange, but in that condition, it can be a deadly color for brown trout when you're fishing in that turbid of water. So the magic happens when you find where it mixes. So you want to look for those edges where the mud mixes with the clear, and the fish are going to probably do most of their effective feeding in that water.
All right, that's good stuff. Hopefully that answered your question, Jim. You brought up tournaments just a few moments ago. Your team, one of the most accomplished teams on Lake Ontario when it comes to tournament fishing. How's that different from what your day-to-day charter fishing would be like?
That's a really great question because, a lot of times people think you're on RBA. That's
It's okay.
I would say have a lot lot of pro teams that do not charter. They are out work fishing and tournament fishing. They actually would have an advantage going into a king salmon event because they're only concerned with that one species. It doesn't matter if they catch 1 or 2 or 3 fish pre-fishing. That's all that matters. Where we're taking out our group daily and a 5 or 6 man crew, they want to bat around. They want action, and I know this to be a fact because I deal with it all the time. You know, I'll have discussions with the clients and say, "Here, this is what's going on. We're getting an odd salmon here and there. We got a much better trout bite. You know, what do you guys want to do?" The first hour it might be, "Hey, let's really try for salmon," and then about an hour in, it might be, "Hey, you know, did you say the trout were biting better?" So even though they may give me one answer, I'm expecting that to happen, and can't blame them. A lot of times, then part of that party is very casual anglers, and they just want to feel the fish fight on the line.
Right.
So we have to be aware of that, and that has to really rule the day. You know, keeping those people happy.
Yep.
When we travel out of town, so, you know, a lot of times we'll allocate a day or two before the tournament. We do a lot of chartering in the tournaments, but we have tournament first clients. They're all at the tournament, so they're perfectly fine with that. It's not about how many we catch or anything like that. Whatever the format of the tournament is, they want to emphasize that in our pre-fishing. So, you know, that helps a lot too. But that's the biggest difference. You got to identify what your format is. In Lake Ontario, there's multi-species formats that, you know, 12 fish formats. Couple that come to mind limit you to just 2 lake trout in your catch. And then the rest can be all salmon. It could be all brown trout. Then there's king salmon only, or I'm sorry, Pacific salmon only. That could be king or coho only. So you could catch the world record steelhead, and it's not going to make a hill of beans for the tournament. So that you need to scout the water that way, and you know, that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we got our first guest joining us now, so we're going to put our headphones on so we can talk to him. Get that set right in front of you there, Vince. Bring him on right now. It's pro walleye angler Stachowski. Ed, how are you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. You said it right. It's a killer. I know. So,
yeah,
hearing me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. You know, we have a lot of skis in Wisconsin, so you'll learn how to say those names in Wisconsin because we have a lot of
good
skis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's bring you on today. You're kind of starting a new season, obviously. Tell us about last year and how the tournament season went last year for you.
Started off good and went downhill from there. Basically, first tournament of the year last year was right down the road from me on Detroit River. It's kind of a crazy event. They put it at the tail end of March, which is it's kind of pushing it up here in the north, right? We were pre-fishing through ice and you know, sub-freezing temperatures. So, which during the week we had fairly good conditions as far as water clarity. But what happened the day that the tournament was supposed to happen, I think we had 40-mile-an-hour winds. So they even canceled a tournament on the river just because the water temperatures were like 36 degrees. So anybody getting knocked out of a boat wouldn't have been too good for too long. But did okay in that one, and then really tried to stay up there in the top and kind of swung for the fences, you know, the old cliche at the next one. And that pretty much set the dominoes in motion for a bad season. You can't, with these guys in this tour, I fished the National Walleye Tour. You can't really have a bad tournament and hope to do well for Angler of the Year. And it did all right through the rest of it, but definitely that was a tough one. That was in Chamberlain, South Dakota. So left little fish to go find big fish and caught no fish, and you know, just put one in the box the first day, and then just went and beat up on some fish the second day where I should have stayed all the first day. So, but all in all, it was one of those seasons where, you learn from, right? You kind of just, you have to take each event and kind of do your post-mortem on it and go, what went well, what didn't go well. And definitely a good learning experience for me. So
it's going to be a bounce back year for you here in 2023. Appreciate you coming on at it. And today we're going to talk about crankbaits for walleyes. And when we start talking about stuff like this, to me, the first question as an angler when you're thinking about this stuff is the why. So let's start off with that. And that's why crankbaits for walleyes? What do you like about them? What's the advantage to using?
Yeah, I think what's nice about all artificial lures and crankbaits fall into that category for sure. It's about efficiency, right? Versus live bait, you're going to be able to keep a bait in the water longer. And I think what's nice about crankbaits, mainly we're using them trolling. There are some applications where we're casting them too, but you're kind of hitting on like all the senses of any fish with a crankbait. You're going to get the visual with it for sure when they're going to be able to see it from a mile away if you're using a bright color like this. But if you're going to go to something that's more natural, like this Walleye Nation, this is one of their custom ones. It looks like a little white bass. But depending on water clarity, right, you're gonna move to different color patterns and where you're fishing and all that good stuff. But then, a lot of them, I don't know if you can hear it real good, but rattles, right? So that's sending out some sound vibrations, the vibration of the bait. We'll talk a little bit about pitch and yaw and roll and all those good things that are some triggering things that crankbaits have. But speed too. If you're properly tuned, we'll talk a little bit about tuning. I mean, you're fishing crankbaits up to like 4 miles an hour for walleye. A lot of guys think, the walleye won't move real fast, but depending on water temperature, when you get in the summer, when they start to spread out real far, you can really crank up the speed on them, and there's triggering mechanisms to speed and talk a little bit about that. But I love artificial baits, right? I don't have to go to the bait shop. There's nothing wrong with going to a bait shop, but I'm on the water, I'm fishing, and say I'm trolling and I see a pullback and I don't get a fish, I don't hook up on it in that rare instance. I don't have to do anything, right? I can keep that bait in the water and keep fishing, right? I'm not having to pull up and see like, hey, I got a short strike and do I still have a minnow or a crawler or a leech or whatever on that bait. I'm not waiting for them to take that bait. As soon as I see any indication of a strike, I can take all the slack out of the line if I'm trolling and put tension on it and kind of bury those treble hooks on it. And one other thing, right? There's even on something like this, Walleye Nation Reaper, I've got 6 hook points. When they come after this thing, they got a really good chance of getting hooked, right? So we can talk about specifics on different aspects of crankbaits, like why to choose and how to choose which one you're going to run when. If you're ready to get in that, I can start on that. So.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and fire away? I've got a couple follow-up questions after that, but if that's kind of where your mind's going, let's go there.
Yeah, sounds good. Crankbaits for walleye, I mean, you can get into such drastic sizes. These 4-inch crankbaits like a Reaper, deep diving bill. You're going to pull this thing. You can get it. You can run it as high as 5 feet in the water column, all the way down into 25 plus feet unassisted with a snap weight or weighted line. You're going to get even deeper down there, but I mean, any part of the water column you can get there with. And then you get into all the way in the other end of the spectrum, right? It's a small, like boogie shad like this, a little tiny bait. Well, why this versus this, and when and where? It's really dependent on like the forage base for the walleye in that system. And then the other part, is about what action that bait's putting on. You know, some of that more, let's say, drastic seeking action at higher speeds, and even depending on the crankbait that you're using, you're going to get more hookups, especially when the fish are more active. That seeking or really erratic movement's going to cause them to trigger on it quite a bit more often than, say, something that has kind of a slower, tighter wobble. One thing to look at, a bill like this shape on it, right? I'm going to get a lot more side-to-side movement on something like that versus, we got so many crankbaits in front of me. Let me pull a different one. Something with like a square bill on it, but then you get a smaller bill on something like this with square bill. I'll still get some side-to-side, but not as much. One common thing we've seen kind of across the board, holds true for walleye crankbaits, less for guys that are going to fish bass and things like that, but is roll of the bait. So, you know, you've got that side-to-side action, and then you've got the angle that's coming through the water. You got your period, and then you got your roll. So what you're going to see on any good walleye bait, you're going to see some side-to-side roll like this, where the bait is kind of flashing its sides. It's doing two things, right? It's putting a certain vibration out in the water, but it's also giving that kind of illusion of like they're seeing all the colors on that bait. So they're going to see not just the bottom or the side, and you're typically fishing over the head of walleye, not right in their face when you're fishing. There are some rules of thumb, like you're going to have to get a lot closer to them when they're in a negative move or the water's cold. So you might actually be fishing right in the same depth of them. But if the water's clear, I'm running crankbaits sometimes 8 feet over their head, and that's a triggering mechanism too. Once they commit that energy, they expend that energy to go up and look at that thing, they're going to strike after it. So, and I did mention speed. One thing important to note is like there really isn't too many bodies of water where there isn't some current there. So, having something where you're going to be able to see not only your speed over ground, but the speed that your lures being pulled through the water in is really important, right? Fishhawk does a great job of that. And the reason why it's important is if I'm going with the current and I'm pulling this like a bait like a reaper, and I think I'm pulling at 1.8 miles an hour, but I'm going with a 1 mile an hour current and I'm only going 0.8, I'm not going to get the action out of it that I think I'm getting, right? And I'm not going to get the rattles aren't going to start to work. I'm not going to get the roll. I think I'm not going to get that hunting action of the bait moving, with the yaw and the pitch out of it. So I might even lose some of my depth that I thought I had if I'm running unassisted. So for everybody, unassisted just means I'm not using any type of snap weight in the system, and I'll be running deeper than I thought if I'm running assisted. So if I'm running either weighted line like lead core, I'm running a snap weight and I'm going with current, it's going to go deeper. Then flip that all around. If I'm going against current, right, I'm going to get a lot wilder action out of the bait. I might be, higher in the water column than I thought I was going to be when I'm assisted with a weight, with a snap weight, or definitely, deeper. If just really depends on which way that current's going, and really that can affect a lot. So you hear guys, I got them going this direction, but I didn't go on that direction. Well, usually the reason for that is just not being cognizant of the current that's down there. So, but throughout the year, you're moving from different size baits depending on the forage. A little bit smaller to the larger baits, just depending on like
we're dealing with a little bit of intermittent.
You're getting a little disconnect there. You able to hear me now? Okay, Chris?
Yeah, we got you loud and clear now. Vince, you got a question for Ed before we wrap up here?
I was just going to ask. Ed. Those fish you're after in the Detroit River, are those migratory fish, or are they residents of Detroit River?
Typically, like in the early spring, what's gonna rule the system are the migratory fish, right? And we got them coming from both directions. There's fish swimming downstream to swim through the Detroit River to go swim into Lake Erie and then swim into tributaries all the way to Maumee River. And we got fish coming the other direction from Lake Erie into the river to spawn. We do have resident fish, but those typically, like if you're in a tournament, they're not the ones that are going to win it for you. But there's fish in there all season long. There's definitely resident fish, and there was even migratory fish showing up late fall last year that are just staging there because there's enough bait there, right? As long as there's enough bait in the system, they're going to kind of come in there and hang out a little longer than they would typically. So yeah, I like to target the migratory fish, and if I'm in a tournament, if it's a weight tournament, the migratory fish that haven't spawned yet, if I can find those, right, ones with eggs in them.
So, if I was going to add one more question, I don't know how much time we have, but that probably the people watching would want to know is spring walleye are a lot of times associated with jigging. When do you decide when you're going to attack that way, or when you're going to troll crankbaits?
In this area, what usually is the tipping point is water clarity, right? If that water is gin clear to say, just mildly stained, a jig is going to work pretty good. Once it dirties up, from that, let's say a foot of visibility or under, that the rattles of a crankbait, the vibration is going to be a lot more effective. And then, as the water temperature warms, I'm going to be pulling that crankbait even a little bit faster through that dirty water, so I'm going to cover more water. Then that progresses. Like the jigging bite in a lot of areas gets a little bit tougher when they start to spread out more because you're not fishing large groups of fish. You're fishing isolated fish that are scattered amongst, say open flats or even open water.
Very good, Ed. We got about 2 minutes. I want to just ask you real quick. You talked about tuning. Can you give us like a 2-minute seminar on basically how to tune those crankbaits before you set them down?
Yeah, everybody's got a pair of pliers in their boat. They make a few tools that do this. But when you put a crankbait in the water, some of them are going to come good out of the box, but they can become untuned, or some will have issues right out the gate. So what I like to do, you can do it anywhere, but like while you're trolling, if you want to check baits, I check them every time before I let them out. If you start to see when you put this bait in the water and you pull it and it runs a little far, right, or a little far left, or blows all the way out, you're going to take your pliers, grab not just that split ring, but you're going to grab that eye and you're going to bend it ever so slightly to try to get it back to center, right? Less is more in this situation. Yeah, you get crazy with it, you're going to wreck your bait, or it'll blow out the other way. You're going to give it a little tweak towards the other direction that you want it to run, and then pull it through the water again. The other thing to be aware of is I like to use a dual lock snap to connect to that split ring. If you tie directly, you can have some issues with tuning sometimes too, depending on the knot use. So just be aware that it isn't like binding when you do that. But there's not much to tuning, pull it as hard as you can forward. If it starts to blow out left to right, give it another adjustment. Keep adjusting a little bit. It goes a long way. And then when you can actually pull it through the water and it stays diving down true all the way, then send it back and let it go. But if it's off, two things are going to happen. You're not going to know, three things. You're not going to know where it's running in the water column when you look at an app like Precision Trolling. You're also, you're pulling it kind of in an odd way through the water, and you also have a chance for tangling your line, right?
Very good. Ed, really appreciate you stopping by and talking to us today. It was fun to have you on and talk just a little bit of crankbaits. I know it's 20 minutes. You probably could have talked 2 hours on this topic, but appreciate you coming in and giving us a taste of what you got going on. And good luck this year as you venture back out on the road and go chase down those walleyes.
I appreciate the time and have fun at the show there. Thanks.
Good luck, Ed.
Thank you.
Take care. That's Ed Stachowski, pro walleye angler. And now we're going to go back to a live guest here. We've got him hanging out here in our little, I guess we called it yesterday the bullpen. So we can pull those off and we can bring in Dave Adrian. Dave, come on over.
I can answer that one question if you need it.
All right, yeah, we got a question here. We'll let Vinny take care of it. Rob Ferguson just asked, do you recommend removing the front treble hook on your stick baits?
So if that was directed for me with trout and salmon, I almost always take the front hook off. We don't think it costs us very many misses, yet it probably saves you a lot of break-offs because trout and salmon like to roll, and they get that front hook caught. They get that front hook caught in the line and will break the line. You almost always will at least get the back hook, even if they get all of the hooks. So that's what we do. We got a gentleman here, Dave Adrian, who can answer on walleye if you take the front hook off.
It's the same sort of situation. Not quite as many twists, but yeah.
Dave, welcome to the show. And we want to have you on today because I think you bring an interesting perspective and an interesting topic, something we haven't talked about here on the show, and that's wind turbines on Lake Erie.
Yes, sir.
And it's something that's becoming a really big topic. Can you just give us a background on kind of what's going on there?
Well, you don't see wind turbines installed in freshwater freezing systems anywhere in the world except Denmark. There's one lake where they lower the water 20 feet in order to make that happen, but it's a new concept. In New York State, as part of their Going Green agenda, by 2030, they wanted to see a lot of that happening. 10 years ago, New York Power Authority put out a proposal as part of their relicensing to do a situation where they would install, wind turbines in Lake Erie. It was defeated, and we thought as a group, we are citizens against wind turbines in Lake Erie, Cawtile.com. And we thought, well, geez, that would be an opportunity that we completely cleared them. 10 years later to the day, they came at us with another proposal. It wasn't New York Power Authority. This time it was New York State working with NYSERDA. And that's an agency designed to determine the feasibility of these types of things. So they set about with a committee of personnel that was primarily from the wind industry to determine the feasibility of wind turbines in Lake Erie. At the same time, Diamond Wind, a subsidiary of Mitsubishi, approached one of our municipalities, town of Evans, with a proposal. It wasn't solicited. They just decided that they were going to see basically if it floated. So luckily, a number of our individuals were there, and we had the opportunity to listen to what they proposed. And they were talking about 50 wind turbines out in Lake Erie, about 0.68 miles apart, and a 3,200-foot no-go zone between them. So that no-go zone represents an area where if the blades were to fail and break, it would sail off into the 3,200-foot diameter area. So we started to come up with what we felt was a list of our concerns, because when we were looking at NYSERDA, who was publishing the results of their live webinars, we weren't seeing the kind of concerns that we had. So we listed them. We started to come up with sort of a working list, and I can sort of go over it. So they were talking about 50 wind turbines from Buffalo to Dunkirk. They talked about 460-foot tall ones, and that was 3 or 4 years ago. Now there's discussion of 1,000 feet tall.
Wow.
And some of them, the wind turbines themselves would be as tall as the M&T building downtown Buffalo. Again, two miles from shore, which our immediate concern was visibility. right away, the aesthetics of that. And if you just go by aesthetics, it's probably not enough to fight them. So we started looking at all the other potential impacts. So we talked about the 3,200-foot exclusion zone around each one. No fishing, no recreation anywhere near, no boating, no kayaking, no nothing. The increased cost for this, we have several individuals have worked in the industry, and they've come up with a pretty darn accurate estimate where the cost would go from $9 per megawatt hour to $135 per megawatt hour. And that would be a cost that incurred in our area, even though the power itself would be sent to the New York City area where the demand is higher. We have the New York Power Authority project here, Robert Moses plant. Even a lot of that power is shunted that direction. So in order to do this, they would have to bury the cables that run from these individual wind turbines through the sediment. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a problem.
Yeah, that's the thing I think really that has a lot of the people in this room concerned is what happens then.
Yeah. So if you were to, they were talking about in their modeling, which is different from the Diamond Wind proposal. The computer modeling that NYSERDA said about used 100 wind turbines from Buffalo to Dunkirk or maybe the PA border. To do that, they would either have to have the kind that get entrenched with a base unit at the bottom, or a floating unit to combat the ice that we have in Lake Erie, and that would be suspended into other anchoring units in the bottom. Either way, they're digging up the bottom. So we have to say stop right there. Zebra mussels came in the 90s, and we were so excited because they do such a great job filtering. A zebra mussel can filter between 1 and 40 liters of water a day. So we saw our visibility, our light penetration go from maybe 6 feet to 30, 35, 40 feet. Great for seeing lures, changed the way we ran lures, changed our selection of lures, obviously changed a lot. But in the process of doing that, Lake Erie, always known for its contamination from the industrial era, took the heavy metals like copper, cadmium, nickel, lead, took those out of the water column and put them down in the bottom. Because they filter so much, they expel what they don't eat onto the bottom. It's called pseudofeces. It gets centered at the bottom now. So great, water column looks great. We do the water testing, just real good. The bottom line is though, all that contaminant is at the bottom. So now we have this potential of dredging the bottom for the cables and dredging the bottom for the weights. So now that will be suspended. So we've documented the contamination in the bottom. We've documented the fact that it can be suspended, and we submitted that as part of our concern, one of our major concerns, because so much of the water flows from west to east towards the Niagara River, and that's where our water intakes are. There's 12 million people get their water from Lake Erie. So now you're talking about a scenario where we're just recontaminating the water. And even if you take that as a short-term thing while the construction goes on, if anybody in any other industry did such a thing, suspended sediments, they would be shut down immediately, fined, and told to cease and desist. So you're talking about giving this industry the permission to do something. It's crazy. So yes, that's definitely a big issue. But from where it stands, from the standpoint of right. So they have to come up with ways of putting bringing the cable ashore. Well, our municipalities aren't really set up for that. There's an area in Buffalo where the steel plant was, Barcelona and Dunkirk. And put it out in the water. Welland Canal is the only place they could come in with these vessels. It's not big enough. So obviously that's an issue. We're concerned about fish habitat. These are areas where walleye migrate from west to east and then back east to west. some of the areas they're talking about too. It's been a big deal this year with the wind and the seiches and so forth. So we're looking at waves, up to 32 feet in height this year, potentially damaging to any sort of thing. We've got all kinds of photo records of what it does to items on shore. The 32 foot and the spray and so forth. I mean, it's obviously ridiculous to consider what would be on these blades. Who's going to maintain them in the middle of a winter and in the middle of an ice situation? So we think this is going to be a big job situation. Oh, we're going to have hundreds and thousands of jobs. The jobs for the creation of it would come in from out of state, from people who are experts at this. The maintenance that they provided in their computer models, 45 people to run 100 wind turbines. So we're going to do all this to support 45 individuals in Lake Erie, 45 in Lake Ontario. It's just ridiculous.
Dave, if I could kick in something there, you talked about the 12 million people that are getting their water. It's even more than that when you think about what goes down the river and into Lake Ontario. And the one thing that I learned when they tried to jam these into Lake Ontario was they hold a vast amount of oil. So if you get ice storms, even if it doesn't topple the structure, there's a very good likelihood you could have a massive oil spill.
Right. So each one has gear lube in it. We've heard some crazy stories that they're going to vegetable oil for lubrication, which is obviously not true. Certainly there's concern about them. In terrestrial situations, that oil routinely leaks and winds up in the land immediately around it. Not considered a big thing because it's not going anywhere. If we have lubrication from the Bazels up on top leaking into the water, it's going to float. It's going to go right down to our water intakes in Buffalo. So yeah, that's it. That's the second part of the contamination issue. The third part of the contamination issue is leading edge erosion. Each of these blades is made up from a combination of fiberglass and epoxy and so forth. They travel, and when they're going full speed, they travel at over 200 miles an hour. So what happens is you have what's called leading edge erosion. These are PFAS chemicals that we're also concerned about right now that would be dumping right into Lake Erie and again making its way towards us. PFAS, some of these chemicals and the epoxies in general were studied in Netherlands and shown that if there was a population around the area, these would get into the system. They can't be removed from water treatment plants. And so they get into the system and are absorbed by humans and completely, affect the actual reproduction part of it.
Yeah, and those are things that people, and I've talked to biologists from my home state of Wisconsin. This isn't just something that's a problem here. It's something that's people are looking at, biologists are looking at all over wherever there's water. That's right. What they're looking at. And that's what I thought was super interesting about you is you're a scientist, but you're also a fisherman. You're a charter captain. So I think that's probably the big thing that our audience wants to know is how would this affect the fishery, and
right.
why is this something that could cause some issues with the fishery?
Right. Well, primarily it's the access.
Yeah.
Right away off the bat, imagine 100 of these, out there in Lake Erie from Dunkirk or from Buffalo to Dunkirk area. With that kind of exclusion zone, we're used to being able to navigate to where we need to be. In the early spring, there's a lot of activity along the border area, and that's the deepest water, and it's kind of used as a navigational area. That would be extremely limited. It would at a bare minimum during that time period, it would be an issue. The rest of it has to do with, I think, contamination. We're concerned about these microplastics and all this sort of contamination. Why would we put wind turbines and just add to that, considering the actual output from them is much reduced compared to what they expected them to be? So I think that's really what we're focused on.
It's really insanity. If I could just add to that, there's two things. I really did a lot of studying on this when they were trying to get them in off Somerset in Lake Ontario. Mm-hmm. The no-go zone, people are not aware of that. They think they're going to pull 6-pound smallmouth off the base of these things. No, they're going to steal all that water from all of us. That'll be no longer accessible to anyone. And what no one thinks about is they will attract fish like there's no tomorrow, stealing the fish from the other areas of the lake, and you won't be able to access, you won't be able to fish those fish. So it's beyond ridiculous. It's just even being proposed, because if I try to put a floating pizzeria out there, I'm getting stopped right away.
Absolutely.
But they're going to put this project out there, and the only reason that it seems like this is being done is so they don't have to pay any royalties to landowners. Right? So that's a separate argument whether you're into windmills or not. They want to put it out there in federal water, and just no one will notice. But yes, they will when you can't drink the water anymore.
Right.
Water is life, and this is ridiculous that they're even putting this stuff anywhere near being a proposal. And the one that I think about on a very simplistic mindset is if dad and his two little kids go out there and their motor conks out, and there's an average Lake Erie wind, their boat could break to pieces if they get blown up on one of these things. Otherwise, they'd blow to shore and at least be able to survive.
Right.
Their tri-hull boat gets blown up against the stanchions of these things, that boat's going to shatter. So it's just, they have no business putting these in the Great Lakes. No business whatsoever.
And in addition, blocking the radar, blocking potential commercial bait. If we're friends with a Great Lakes freighter ship, and the captain of this vessel, and he said he's more than once come over from the Canadian border and crossed over to help vessels that are in distress on the other side. There would be none of that. There'd be no traffic back and forth whatsoever. The good news is NYSERDA finally came up with their ruling on it in terms of feasibility study. And on December 31st, they sort of slipped it in under the wire after waiting 2 or 3 years for it. And we find out that, and we would have been happy if they would have just said, look, we're kind of neutral about this. Instead, they ruled, as they had 10 years earlier, that they didn't think it was a good idea. And just read a short section from here. This is from the white paper. There's the big 136-page document that is their study, and then there's the white paper sort of summarizing it. It says, in short, after completing the feasibility study and considering these various dimensions collectively, NYSERDA recommends that now is not the right time to prioritize Great Lakes wind projects in Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. So that's great. We would never have believed that it would be that successful. So it'd be easy to say, okay, we're good to go. We don't have to worry about this. But remember, 10 years ago, they did this prior to this. So what we have decided to do is say, yeah, that's great. It looks like they did listen to what we had to say, our concerns, but it also looks like they came to some good, solid, common sense conclusions as well. So what we think is the next thing we need to do is come up with a permanent moratorium. So we're working with our local legislators and senators for New York State and congressmen to produce legislation that will move forward with a permanent moratorium. Canada has a moratorium on this, and a lot of it has to do with gas wells and so forth over there. So it's doable. And we're going to look for a lot of support from all our angler groups and outdoor groups and outdoor recreational groups, anybody who's associated with it, so that we've got an investment group that's willing to put money into supporting this. And so we intend to do a lot more in terms of PR and moving forward with it that way. And we're going to ask all the outdoor groups if they can pass a resolution saying, moving forward, we are in support of this major legislation. So that'd be the goal.
Very good. Well, we're running out of time, but I want you to just put your website back up here. It is CAWTILE. It's Cogtile. It's Citizens Against Wind Turbines in Lake Erie.com.
Correct.
So if you want to get more information, you can find it there. Get a hold of folks like Dave and try to keep our Lake Erie the way it is right now. And
we shall try.
It was one of those things, like you said, wasn't too long ago. It was a lake that was full of contaminants, and now you're looking at one of the cleanest lakes out there. And let's keep it that way. Right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. Vince, we're going to put our headphones back on. We've got just had one scientist come off. We're going to bring a scientist on the show, and this is Cory Goldsworthy. Cory, how are you today?
Doing fine, Chris. How are you?
We are living the dream. We're sitting here in Niagara Falls, New York, and we're talking fishing. So it's kind of a fun deal. You're
Great.
speaking
Sounds
to us
good.
from Duluth, correct?
Correct. Yep. It's been kind of a balmy February up here so far, but overnights are getting back down to 0 or below. So we had a fake spring for a little bit, but we're kind of back in winter for another week or so.
Yeah, so things are setting up. But, I know that in the past there's been a lot of years where people have been out on the ice out there in Duluth Harbor and out in front of the city. They're doing some ice fishing. What's the ice fishing been like this year?
Yeah, the harbor pretty much freezes over every year and is accessible to ice anglers there. We're really close now. I wish we had another week or so of some below 0 overnights and some, single digit to low teens during the days, because it would lock up fairly quick if we had some pretty calm nights. The water temp is, anytime it gets below 0 now overnight, there's a layer of skim ice, and it doesn't take long for that to build on Lake Superior if we can keep the winds away for a while. But I'm not sure we're going to get an ice fishing event out on the main lake this year.
So we want to have you on, talk some lake trout, and that's kind of the main thing. It's funny, you get out east and everybody wants to talk about salmon. They can't figure out why all of our pictures from Lake Superior all have lake trout on them. Let's talk about the lake trout. And with this winter the way it's been, do you think that's going to have any effect on the season this year, and maybe as a whole with lake trout it's going to look like this year?
Sure. Yeah. The winters and overwinter conditions leading into spring for lake trout really don't have an impact that much on angling for them. It could have an impact if temperatures are cold enough to where it messes around with smelt migration a little bit while they're spawning, because smelt being non-native, they're the most abundant non-native prey fish in Lake Superior. And in the springtime when they're spawning, the smelt will move in near shore to spawn, and the lake trout follow right behind them. So if there is going to be an impact from any overwinter conditions, it might be, if it's too cold to get smelt moving in near shore right away in the spring, that might be pushed out a little bit. But typically lake trout, they occupy mostly towards the bottom where temperatures barely change, compared to surface temperatures. So they're very well adapted to Lake Superior. We've had high abundances of lake trout. I think this past spring lake trout assessment for us was the highest numbers that we've ever seen before. So, we've got great numbers of lake trout out there, and it looks to be, a good fishing season here. But I had mentioned to a bunch of anglers a few days back that during our fall hydroacoustic and midwater trawl surveys on Lake Superior, where we estimate Cisco abundance for our commercial quotas, we did see a really good 2022 year class of Cisco, bloater, and kai. They're native prey fish for Lake Superior, and by the looks of it, it could be a fairly epic year class that we might not have seen in our careers. So you've got a whole bunch of bait fish out there now. I imagine every predator is gorging themselves, and we heard over the summer and into the fall last year that it was some pretty tough fishing. And we know in the fisheries world that when you do have a high prey fish abundance and the predators are gorging themselves, it's going to be a tough bite for anglers. So, we'll see what happens with this year class. We'll know whether or not it's actually as big as we think it is this spring when some of our other agencies around the lake, like USGS, does their bottom trawl surveys. But it's good for Lake Superior that there's a big input of energy and food, but it might be a little tough for anglers here in a few years if lake trout are actually gorging themselves to the point they don't want to move too much or go after anglers baits. So
Cory, you talked a little bit about bait fish and having that abundance of bait fish right now. Is there anything else that ties into the numbers that you're seeing with lake trout? I mean, what else attributes to this kind of bumper crop of fish you have in the system right now?
Yeah, so Lake Superior was the only Great Lake to retain any wild lake trout populations after sea lamprey invasion. It just worked out that the infestation of sea lamprey into Lake Superior being the last lake in the system right around the 1950s. Sea lamprey did have an impact on lake trout. There's no doubt there, but they didn't wipe them out like they did in the other lakes. So right about that mid 1950 periods where we found a chemical control for sea lamprey and were able to knock those populations down, we had wild stock of lake trout left in Lake Superior that we could work with for rehabilitation. And then lake-wide, through collaboration with partner agencies and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, it was really a three-pronged approach to restoration in Lake Superior with fishing regulations, sea lamprey control, and a stocking for rehabilitation program. And in Minnesota waters, we just discontinued stocking lake trout in, I want to say it was 2017, because we had reached all of our rehabilitation goals that we had set for ourselves. And what we were seeing was the lake trout that we were stocking being eaten by other lake trout. So that's not a very efficient use of a stocking program when you're essentially stocking lake trout that are getting eaten out there. So that approach, especially the sea lamprey control and regulation of the commercial and the sport fisheries, really allowed that lake trout population to rebound to where it is today.
So you have this native population of lake trout. There's different subspecies of lake trout. Can you tell about the different subspecies that call Minnesota North Shore their home? I know you've got at least a couple subspecies there.
Yeah, we do. We've got the leans, the lean lake trout, which is the typical lake trout that anglers are fishing for near shore. Typically, lean lake trout will inhabit water 240 feet or shallower. Then we have the Siskoet morphotype of lake trout, which is a fat form. They tend to occupy waters greater than 400 feet. And they're found as deep as 1,300 plus feet, as deep as Lake Superior is. So they're a very deep water adapted morphotype of lake trout. And then you've got humpers and redfins. Humpers and redfins are more of an offshore reef type of fish that likes hanging out along these shallower reefs, but surrounded by deep water offshore. So we will see a few humpers in our assessments the closer that we get up to the Canadian border and Isle Royale that way. But typically in Minnesota, we'll see the leans and the Siskoets mostly in our assessment surveys and in our sport fisheries.
Vince, do you have anything for Cory?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm over here on Lake Ontario. I spent my life chasing these trout and salmon here. Watched it come from the ashes. We did have lake trout extinction here. They're trying to get it reestablished. They're finding some naturals. They get really excited when they do find them. Usually in the bottom trawls when they're doing alewife assessment, things like that. But it's always been fascinating to hear about Lake Superior, and I definitely want to make it to that rock. Is it Standard Rock?
Standard Rock, oh yeah.
Get there someday. Yeah, Standard. Now, that said, do you see many Pacific salmon in your fishery? I do see maybe show now and again where they show returns to certain rivers. I know they're all wild now, but do you have that in your area?
Yeah, we do. So, in our sport fishery, we have Chinook, coho, pink, salmon. We have rainbow trout. We'll catch the occasional brown trout every once in a while, either a naturalized wild produced brown trout or brown trout stocked, the sea forellen stocked, I think, mostly by Wisconsin. But we do have naturally reproducing populations of Chinook, coho, and pinks in our waters. We did have a stocking program for Chinooks back in the early 2000s. And when we evaluated that fishery, that stocking program, using our creel surveys, looking at what anglers were catching, essentially what we found was 90 to 95% of the Chinooks being caught by anglers were wild produced fish. And the numbers of adult Chinook that we had returning to the French River, where we were getting eggs, doing our egg take operations from, dropped down to such low of a level that it really wasn't feasible to keep that program going. So, one of the things that I always like to say in Lake Superior is that we are very different from all of the other Great Lakes, primarily in thermal habitat, cold water, and depth. And that cold water and that depth affects our productivity and how much fish we can produce, right? And with our heavy stock of lake trout that we have now, we have seen our prey fish populations decline over time, which is to be expected, right? You rehabilitate and restore your top level native predator, you should expect some of those prey fish populations to decline over time. And that's what we've seen. And again, with the cold, pretty infertile water that Lake Superior has, we don't have the huge bait fish populations that the other Great Lakes do. In fact, we've gotten some of the initial results from our lake-wide diet study that we did in 2021 back, and along Minnesota's North Shore, we actually saw Chinooks eating more terrestrial insects and mysis, which is a freshwater shrimp, small shrimp. We've seen them eat more terrestrial insects and mysis than fish. And that kind of goes with the perception that we had from our own samples and from angler comments in 2021 that it was a really bad smelt year. They just weren't hanging around. It was low abundance overall based on some other assessments that we've seen. And we just don't have the productivity, especially in those years like the past year where spring seemed to stretch on into, mid-June, and that cold water hung around for a long time. So it's going to be neat to see with this potential recruitment event of Cisco, bloater, and Kayai from 2022. It's going to be neat looking at those predator diets and seeing how they change, because in Lake Superior, if you're a small silvery fish, there's something big chasing you. So it'll be interesting to see how that looks this coming summer and fall. And we'll definitely, keep our eyes on that prey fish population.
Yeah, we're getting a few questions asking about forage. Derek Mule says he's caught quite a few lake trout, grasshoppers. I'm not sure where Derek fishes. And then we got a question or something here from Nick Cook. And again, this is probably actually be more a question that you could answer better, Vince. You just asked, are you finding lake trout feeding on gobies more than Cisco's and smelt?
So it's kind of seasonal for us. They absolutely target gobies early in the spring. The lake trout are in shallower water than the alewife movement. Smelt, for the most part, are either in the Niagara River or they're yet to come in shallower. So yes, we find many more gobies in the April in the lake trout than we would alewives or smelt. When he asks, I believe he's from your area though, Cory, do you find that I'm eating more gobies than Cisco's or smelt?
Yeah, our goby populations are fairly limited to the nearshore natural embayments like the St. Louis River, and we really don't see a big goby population out in the main basin of Lake Superior. But what we typically find in lake trout are a very generalist feeder in Lake Superior. Essentially anything that's available to them, they'll eat. We see obviously smelt and herring or Cisco and some of the other native prey fish species. But then, during the summer, we do see a heavy feeding on terrestrial insects. So insects that are, falling out of the sky and they get caught in the currents and they make these bug slicks, and those fish will be up there feeding off the surface on those bug slicks regularly. And we even see that in that deep water form, Siskowet lake trout. Those fish, living 400, 800, 1,200 feet down, we'll see in their stomachs bugs as well. So they're making some pretty huge migrations coming up to the surface to feed. And again, I think that all goes back to, the prey fish limitations that we do have in Lake Superior based on that cold water and productivity. But yeah, some of the neat things that, we found in this diet study are, snakes and grouse legs and birds. And I think we found our second bratwurst now. In Minnesota, we found a bratwurst in the stomach of a Siskowet back in about 2014 2014, I think it was. And we just find all sorts of weird things in the stomachs of the lake trout. It seems like, they're built for Lake Superior. They're built for that cold water, and they'll take advantage of whatever food source is out there.
Yeah, that fish must have been down in Wisconsin feeding.
Do we have time,
Yeah.
Chris, for him to answer that question? There's a question from a gentleman in your area. Does this new decree with the gill net have an effect on you?
I think you're talking. He might be talking about the consent decree over in Michigan waters. That's kind of on the east end of Lake Superior. That doesn't have anything to do with us. We work with the 1842 and 1854 treaties on the west end of the lake. So we've kind of got our own deal going on here.
Okay. Yeah, Derek said that. He found those lake trout full of grasshoppers on the North Shore of Lake Superior. Hey, we got Randy Kruger checking in too from Facebook, and Randy wants to talk about a topic that you and I the last time we talked, and this is something where when we start talking about Lake Superior, people get really excited about it. The coaster brook trout. So you want to touch on coaster brook trout for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. I can start from the beginning. Back before clear-cut logging in the 1800s and early 1900s, and then the fires that pretty much ruined the cold water swamps along the North Shore that provided our rivers with cold water. Brook trout were everywhere. You hear initial reports of, that folks back in the late 1800s, early 1900s taking Mackinac skiffs out of Duluth, paddling them up the shore and catching 300 brook trout out of the mouth of the French River, averaging like 2.5, 3, 4 pounds. No problem. So back in the day, when habitat was great and those populations were strong, brook trout were a fantastic fishery. The last 5 years in particular, we've invested pretty heavily in trying to better understand our brook trout populations here on the North Shore. In Minnesota on the North Shore here, we have waterfall barriers within the first couple hundred yards from the lake. So we have above barrier brook trout populations, and then we have below barrier spawning brook trout populations. And then we have coaster populations that are in Lake Superior that we know of. So we're really focusing on genetic aspect of those three populations and how they're interacting with each other, whether or not we're getting below barrier reproduction, or if those fish are reproducing out in Lake Superior, or if all of the fish that we see below barrier and in the lake are coming from above barrier populations. Those are kind of the big key issues right now that we're trying to focus on with brook trout. We're also really focusing on protection of good habitat and restoration of poor habitat, especially protection and restoration of any cold water seeps and springs that might be in our tributaries, because on the North Shore of Minnesota, we have clay and bedrock, and we don't have good groundwater input. So a lot of our water is overland flow that can get pretty warm in the summertime and pretty low if we don't see rain events. So we're really working on habitat protection and restoration, and hopefully we see continuing growing numbers of brook trout and coaster brook trout, the 20, 22-inch fish in our surveys.
Yeah, if you've never been to this area, it's mountainous and a lot of volcanic rock, and like you said, waterfalls. If you like to go see waterfalls, the North Shore is a great place to go. You could drive up the shore north of two harbors, and it seems like every 5 or 6 miles there's a big set of waterfalls. It's just a super cool area. Cory, our next guest isn't with us yet, so do you mind sticking around for a few more minutes here? We'll chat some more lake trout with you.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
So let's talk about that a little bit. The area that we're from, let's say, about that Michigan coast, those guys are out bouncing their downrigger weights into the sand and trying to stir up lake trout. You're not going to do that in your neck of the woods unless you want to lose a lot of gear. So can we talk a little bit about the challenges of fishing all those reefs and all that rock that you have there?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started myself fishing on Lake Superior here, I made the pretty dumb rookie decision to try to drop an anchor in somewhat shallower water in the springtime and try jigging. And I dropped it down and realized right away that I wanted to move a little bit. And the first time I took a tug on my anchor line, it was stuck. So, that you can't drop an anchor. If you've got iPilot and you can put that on park mode and just hang out there, that's great. But if you're going to be doing anything on Lake Superior, especially along the North Shore, having a good graph with the bathymetry and having all of the contour lines on your graph is a fantastic resource. And keying in on kind of those flat areas where if you are downriggering, like I do, I just have a downrigger with a hand crank, so I don't have any fancy downriggers tied into my graphs that automatically go up and down, right? If I'm out there trolling and I come across a reef, I better be in the back cranking that sucker up pretty quick. So you gotta keep on the graph, keep watching the graph. And when I'm fishing for lake trout, I'll drop my downrigger about a foot off the bottom, even here on Lake Superior, because it seems like that's where you have to be, right? You can't be 6 feet, 10 feet above and catch a lot of fish. But if you can get in that 1 to 2 feet off the bottom, you're going to get a good number of fish hookups. And yeah, absolutely. You got to watch the graph and get a good card with good depth contours on it.
Yeah, it's a real challenge when you're fishing something like that, because you just have so many humps and ups and downs out there. It's just a really interesting area to look at when you start pulling up your charts and take a look at what you have.
Yep. Yeah. And one of the neat things that we have on the North Shore here as well is we have a really good jig fishery where, essentially you can take your walleye gear and your walleye boat out and find a hump out there close to shore and drop a jig down and jig off those rock outcrops or whatever structure is laying down there. And it's a really neat way. I mean, you fish 120, 150 feet of water with walleye gear jigging, and you tie into a 5 or 10 pound lake trout. It's a pretty fun fight. So, if folks are interested in trying out something new, there's a lot of information online from jig anglers up this way, and you don't need a 30 plus foot boat to get out there and enjoy the resource. Watch the weather, get a good weather app, and watch the nearshore forecasts and get out there and have fun.
Very good. Cory Goldsworthy from the Minnesota DNR. Thanks for coming on, talking a little trout with us. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks again. Great seeing you.
All right, Cory Goldsworthy from Minnesota DNR. Our next guest is hanging out in the virtual green room. I see he's out on he's supposed to be out on the hard water, but a little bit different this year than what we're used to. Pat Kalmerton joins us, and Pat is at the Battle on Bago on Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin, and conditions are a little wet out there, Pat.
No, it's perfect. Matter of fact, are you there? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect.
Yes,
no,
sir.
Conditions are perfect. We're just actually coming off the ice. Matter of fact, we were out with Justin Cohen. He has the guide service out here over on Bago, and we were all out there. And I'm telling you what, we caught some perch. We had a good time and everything else.
Yeah, a lot of people were concerned all week long. Yeah, we're here. People were concerned all week long with the rain and everything, but you're saying everything's setting up good? Going to have a good tournament this weekend?
There's absolutely no worries at all as far as the ice conditions right now. We're north of Oshkosh. We went out. We had probably had 30 people on the ice. We had a bunch of side by sides. We have 12 to 15 inches of ice consistently. The crack with the bridge was good. Like I said, we were out there since 7 o'clock this morning. We had zero issues, zero problems. Everything was rock solid, and that's here. Now, I'm not saying that the ice everywhere is perfect. I'm not saying that you should go, disregard everything. But right now, where we are, life is good.
That's good to hear, Pat. We want to have you on today and talk some brown trout fishing on Lake Michigan, and that's something that's really near and dear to your heart. It's something you enjoy, and I know that there's already been some guys out in the water this winter already fishing. And again, we've had some mild conditions. Oh, there's a perch. I knew Kalmerton would find a way to bring some fish onto the screen. That's a nice one, Pat.
Look at that. No,
Yeah.
but sorry. I'm back with you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got you, man. If I had big perch like that, I'd be pretty excited too. I'd probably be tuning out the guy on the other line 1,000 miles away from you. But let's talk some brown trout, specifically Lake Michigan brown trout. When does that kind of get going for you? When do you guys start targeting that?
Soon as we can get on the open water, you know. So as soon as the tributaries to the harbors, the rivers, first time that we can get to any open water, we're going to be putting our 16-foot, 18-foot, 20-foot boats in, and we're going to be targeting that skinny water. We're going to be going anywhere that has sand. Usually we start off with the sand bottom. Reason being it's going to warm up faster. You know, you're going to look for discharges as far as different culvers. You're going to look at river systems coming in, any of that where you're going to have warmer water to be able to do that. I'm just going to put you here so I can talk to you better. How's that sound?
Oh, it looks good. So, Pat, you're looking for that warm water. Go ahead.
Yeah, so when you get into brown trout, early season, a lot of times Easter's are going to be the kickoff, but it's going to be before that. The hardest thing about the brown trout fishery is the best time for brown trout fish is the best time for walleyes in the tributaries and the moving water as well. So we're going to get up into that real skinny water. When I say skinny water, 12 foot or less, we're going to run our boards pretty much almost bouncing off every boulder that's within 2-3 feet of the shoreline. You know, we're going to have our offshores 4, 5, 6 on each side, and we're going to go. You know, deep divers on the deep side, shallow divers on the shallow side. We're going to be running, you know, that shallow water. So as soon as the ice is out of the harbors, out of the marinas, we're going to be chasing.
Vince, anything for Pat right off the bat here?
No, I would take it you're fishing Wisconsin water of Lake Michigan?
Yes. Yep. So we're based out of Sheboygan. So we do Sheboygan, Port of Sheboygan, our bigger boats, you know, our 28 Baja and stuff, and our 10 meters and stuff. Those don't get in the water until mid-May. But before that, we have all of our walleye boats. So we're going to be running a lot of boards. We're going to be running a lot of slide divers, things like that up in real skinny water. You know, but we're based out of Sheboygan. Now, that's not saying that we're not going to be up in Manitowoc or down in Port Washington. We're going to slide all over the place. Milwaukee is really good harbor for brown trout. You know, Racine can be really good. So the whole western side is, you know, Bailey's Harbor. Bailey's Harbor always has that brown trout tournament up in April, like the second weekend of April. A lot of times we'll go up and we'll play in that and test our luck and see how we can do up there. But
so has that been that way for decades, or is this an improving fishery for you?
So it's changed a little bit. You know, the clarity of the water. It's been there forever. I mean, I remember 30 years ago going up in our 16-foot smoker craft with our 30-horse tiller. So that fishery is one of those that you can do no matter what you have. And not only that, but shore people, you know, men, women, children, whatever. You don't have to have the boat and the big fancy to go catch these fish, because they move into shallow water. You know, they're looking for that warmer discharge at power plants. They're looking at any runoff from the shoreline, the melting snow, the water, anything like that. So if you find any of that inside the marinas, casting little Cleos, casting mag lips, casting anything that has a lot of, you know, flash, vibration, any of that sort, and then trolling, of course, you know, once you get in. So it hasn't changed. You know, the baits way back in the day that kind of fell in the wayside a little bit are coming back. You know, there's pearl wobblers. You can catch fish on a pearl wobbler the same that you can catch a fish on a stinger. You know, I mean, it's one of them where you got you got the baits there. You can use them.
Right. One of the things we hear about now with social media I'm over on Lake Ontario, New York water. Big giant brown trout being caught through the ice in Wisconsin. Is that just a here and there thing, or is that a pretty big fishery for that?
No, it's a good fishery. Right now our it's goofy. You know, we've had a really weird winter. Now your German brown trout and stuff like that, we're catching them. I would say every day you're getting one or two of them. It's more of a entertainment resource. Those big girl browns we like to see go back. And if you want to keep a fish, keep a couple of steelhead or something because they're mixed in with them. But yeah, they rub their bellies coming out of the hole pretty good. You know, I mean, they got that big old jaw coming through. They got that, real dark markings all the way through. Just a gorgeous fish. There's, we have posts over on Wolfpack Adventure site and all the other guides up and down from Racine all the way up to, I would say, Sturgeon Bay, being able to get on in those tributaries and working those different, the water. So there's two different ways to fish those. If you're fishing them on like Milwaukee Harbor or Sheboygan Harbor or into the stalling water, the stale water, the slack without any movement and stuff, a lot of times you're going to be running either shrimp, you're going to be running your cured eggs, you're going to be running stuff like that. Sometimes, they're hitting minnows and stuff. But once you start getting into the river system, it's not a bad idea, especially if you have current and stuff. And again, looking for that safe ice. But if you can find current, those current breaks and running three ways with spinning glows and then your spawn sacks or shrimp and stuff like that, they're there. They're not there like they used to be. I would say 10 years ago, we saw more of them, but they're certainly there yet.
Yeah, very cool.
Let's get back to the trolling aspect of this brown trout in the spring. And one of the things that we track, not only through the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast, but also through Fishhawk Electronics, we're really seeing a growing number of people who have always been inland fishermen going out and trying to venture out of the big water. They see the pictures of these big fish and it intrigues them. They want to get involved into it. And I think that's one of the cool things about this brown trout fishery in the spring is you don't need a fish hawk to do it. You don't need a downrigger to do it. A couple of rod holders and just an inland boat, and you can troll along this. And you just kind of give some people some insight and just how to get started. If they're a person who's been fishing inland lakes, maybe for bass or walleye, and they want to give this a try, what advice would you give?
Oh man, I would say when you're trolling, exactly what you're saying. You don't need the electronics. Now, the electronics certainly help as far as temperature wise and stuff, because you'll get into that, that seam where that river is discharging, and you'll know the water temp, not only the surface, because if you have a heavy surface wind, it's not going to be the same down even 8 foot of water. But you don't need downriggers. You don't need all the fancy electronics and all that other stuff. If you have a bass boat, if you have any kind of stuff, all you really need to do is grab yourself either a straight up braid line coming straight back and get your fluorocarbon, 8-pound test fluorocarbon, a 4-foot lead, with a barrel swivel connecting the two so you don't have any slippage. If you do get snagged up, you can snap that fluorocarbon off and go, because we have great big rocks. Sheboygan to the north, you have rocks. To the south, you have sand. It's one of them things where anybody and everybody can do it. You don't even need really rod holders. You can go up there and hold the rod if you want, because there's no pull as far as the dipsy divers and the coppers and the wire divers and I could go on and on and on about the technology now that we are fortunate enough to be able to fish with in deeper water. But this, you can follow the shoreline up. You can get up into, that shallower water. You're not very far out. It's not so intimidating. You're not losing sight of the land. On a nice spring day, it's an easy run. And you don't even have to go anywhere. You can do it right around the harbor. You can do it within the walls of the harbor in Sheboygan. And, it's a fishery that I think it opens up a lot of options and possibilities for those that don't have the resources to get out onto the deeper water.
I think it's one of those trips too that if you've got younger anglers with you, or maybe somebody who's just brand new to it, like you said, it's not intimidating. It's not a super difficult fishing technique. Just getting some new people out on the water, it's a great opportunity for that as well.
Yeah, and there again, if you troll for walleyes, if you're a person that fishes anywhere that you're casting or trolling for walleyes, you already have the baits that you need for your brown trout. A lot of it is going to be your stick baits. You got thunder sticks and Rapalas and bombers, and all of those are really good. I like to run a lot of maglips and stuff like that. Shorter profile, a lot of vibration. Early in the year, your alewives aren't going to be your 6-7 inch alewives yet, so downsize them a little bit. Make sure that you're running your juniors, and make sure that you have your shallow diving on the inside and your deep diving on the outside to be able to get that. And even that, it's all flatline. It's all that 2 miles an hour, 2.3 miles an hour, all flatline. Just, it's perfect.
Stick bait, same stuff you're going to use for walleye, flatline stuff. What I want you to chat about real quick here, Pat, is this other project you got going on. Let's just, you got about 3 minutes here. Tell me a little bit about Take Them Kids Outdoors. I know it's something that's really important to you, is getting the youngsters out in the field.
This is perfect. Take Them Kids Outdoors is a huge thing. You got to take a kid fishing. You got to take a kid hunting. It doesn't matter if you go fishing, hunting, whatever the case may be. Go skip some rocks. Go for hikes. The weather's going to be starting to change a little bit. It is very dear to me because my father did it with me. It instilled a passion of mine to go outside and to teach. I had a young gentleman today. He's a junior in high school. He caught his first fish, ice fishing today, and it was an awesome perch. God, the smile on this kid's face is better than 100 perch that I caught any day. It's better. The smile, the enthusiasm, that kid is now hooked. He knows the equipment that we bought it on. He's going to go buy that kind of equipment because that is what it is about. Somebody instilled this passion into you by taking and showing you that. And if you started late, I'm sorry, but I'm glad that you started. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, I'm welcome to the enjoyment of life. You put too much grind into everything that you do and who you are. It's nice just to shut everything off. It's kind of goofy because right now we're talking about electronics, but turn your damn electronics off and go out and enjoy the outdoors and have a good time. I mean, God, I love it. I'm sorry. You're right. It is very important to me. It is something that I'm glad that I get to experience those and create memories with my children and my friends' kids. And it's pretty cool. I just hope that when I'm really old and, not able to do anything, that they do it for me and they take me along. Maybe that's why it's so important to me. Maybe because I'm just worried about what my future is. And hopefully they don't just throw me in somewhere and say, here, you're on your own, be gone.
That's what I like to do. I like to take my dad out fishing once in a while, take him out hunting. And I always say, everybody's focused, hey, we got to get the kids outdoors. I always say, hey, you got to get some old guys outdoors too. Get them out there and let them experience. So that's kind of what it's all about. But this Facebook page that Pat's created, it's called Take Them Kids Outdoors, TTKO. And it's just a place where people can go and share photos of kids out in the outdoors. They don't have to worry about anybody making negative comments about it. It's something that Pat really keeps an eye on, make sure everybody's staying positive on there, and really just kind of promoting these kids getting outside and doing stuff. And like you said, it could be fishing, it could be hunting, it could be ice skating, it could be bird watching. It's a lot of different things that you've got on there, and I think it's just kind of a fun catalog of just people enjoying the outside.
It's awesome. I'm I'm happy that everybody is enjoying it, because I did it just to, keep track of the history of us, and other people are jumping on that bandwagon. It's awesome.
Well, he's Captain Pat Kalmerton, and you can look him up. He's at wolfpackadventures.com. That's his charter. But Pat does the ice fishing thing. He does the open water thing in the summer, and enjoying Battle on Bago this weekend. I'm glad to hear that ice conditions are good and people are going to be able to enjoy that event, because it is quite an event out there. So, Pat, have a great weekend. I appreciate you taking some time out. I know you're busy. You've got a lot of sponsors you're helping out with this weekend, so appreciate you taking time out and talking to us.
Hey, I appreciate it, and you guys have a wonderful day as well. I'll have a beer for you over at the tent.
Thank you.
Sounds good, Pat. Take care. All right. That's it for our virtual guest for the afternoon segment. We've got one more guest coming on, and he's standing in our bullpen. Craig, I'll have you come around this way. He is Mr. Craig Sleeman. Craig, how you doing, man?
I feel like I'm at the Super Bowl halftime show with this gold microphone here. I don't know if this is pretty special, seeing you guys up here with this bling. I don't know.
That's why we leave that there. That's the guest mic. We want the guest to feel really important, so we gave him the gold microphone.
I like it. Well, we've been following along all the way from Rochester. You guys have been doing a great job today. It was nice to see the following last night. Had a good show last night. Looking forward to a big weekend here in Niagara Falls.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, we've always done this show from our headquarters in Minnesota, and to be able to get here on the floor on the show, have people like Vince be able to join us, and just the whole world of this Great Lakes fishery actually seems to kind of descend in this area for the show. This is a show that's really focused on the things that we are talking about. So it was great to get here and just be able to talk to everybody. We've got the salmon and trout folks here, and we got a guy like you here, more into the walleye stuff, but I know you perch.
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything. We do a little bit of everything.
Well, you're an upstate New York guy. Just tell us about yourself and kind of what it's been like for you growing up in this area and the different things that you've done in your background.
Yeah, my twin brother Ethan and I got a very early start with our grandparents on Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes. They had a houseboat. My grandfather fought in War II, landed on Omaha Beach as a Coast Guard captain. And, we kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit, and having some time on the water in the Finger Lakes was a blessing. It kept us busy in the summertime, and it kept us busy, learning new techniques and learning from, some of our elders. And, when they would come in with these big catches off the lake and put them out on the picnic table and, have a quote unquote hickey fry, we would, just be drooling at the mouth trying to get an opportunity to jump on their boat. And when they gave us a chance, we kind of, took liking to that, and we kind of built ourselves a little bit of a program. We started fishing, more post-college. We were big sports guys, back in college. Both my brother and I played lacrosse at a pretty high level, both All-Americans, and, actually got drafted by the Buffalo Bandits over here locally, but never kind of pursued the professional career and kind of turned that competition into fishing. Sure. And, the cool thing was we had a backyard of the Finger Lakes and Lake Erie and Lake Ontario to do so. And so we kind of got our start there. And then, things have kind of just springboarded here the last couple of years. Being a full-time art educator in Fairport, it's tough to get away on some of the school schedule. I had to, duck out at ninth period a little early to get here. But, the way that things are setting up is, our summertime, we do have a little bit of extra time to work and play, at the same time. So Ethan and I have really kind of pursued that fishing angle, and it's been going really well.
Yeah, we had Ed Stachowski on a little bit earlier and Ed on tour with you. But, last year was the first year that you really went all in on the tour. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the cool thing about the National Walleye Tour last year is the championship was here in Dunkirk. And, having that big target on Dunkirk, New York, a place that you and I have actually fished together. And, I've held some different seminars here and I know a little bit more about the area. That was kind of the big goal in mind. And so my co-angler, Mike Urema, and I, we kind of put together a schedule where we could, work back and forth with each other. And he retired as a law enforcement officer over in Syracuse, and he committed to a full season. And that's really helpful, having a co-angler, be able to travel and cook meals and drive me to the airport so I could come back and work those days that I needed to, continue my real career. And, but having Dunkirk being the end all result for the championship was the big reason we fished the whole tour. And, fishing 3 out of the 4 places we had never been was the biggest challenge. finding ways of catching fish in current on the Detroit River, and understanding concepts out in Chamberlain, South Dakota, and then back to the muddy Mississippi, and learning barge engagements with locks and timing and willow cats that sting you and make your arm go numb for a half an hour. And so the challengers were really set. We really put ourselves up for failure to begin with, but with that hard work and the team like Ed Stachowski and Wayne Van Dyke, we had Mike Deffenbaugh for a while, and our great co-anglers like Brett Gilbertson, and we had some guys like Kurt Yoder and Mike, and we had a really great team aspect. And so we brought that past of working together as a team and put it together this year for the NWT. And having a top 10 finish in your own home water is nothing but confetti, and it's a special feeling to have our crew here supporting that. And I couldn't have done it obviously without all of them. So it was a great experience.
Very cool. Well, the topic today, what we wanted to talk about was worming for walleyes on Lake Erie. And when you and I went fishing out of Dunkirk, that's what we were doing. And it was pretty darn productive. So kind of give people an overview on that.
Sure. I mean, worming on Lake Erie is, it goes hand in hand. I mean, it comes from the Western Basin, the guys like the Zarts and, the Ross Robertsons of the world. They're just unbelievable worm fishermen. And they taught us a lot. And, the late Bob Henton also taught us a lot about pulling some, really interesting ways and concepts with our clearing water. Coming from the West, that greener, water that's a little bit more colored, it does change the game a little bit. And so you can get away with a little bit more out West. And so we feel like the Eastern Basin, bringing some of those tactics up here and learning from those guys really did help in our program, especially, 2017, we won the Sunset Bay Shootout, which is right now 150 to 200 boats, and it's 45, 50 grand to win now. And it's, it's become a real big tournament. And we won it on some structure, over on the North Shore, and we were able to drive to Canada on, 30 feet of water. And so we learned some tactics that really, worming was our way of making money. And, it's since changed quite a bit. The fish have diversified a little bit. The zebra mussels cleaned up the lake. The gobies have come into play a little bit more. We're ever changing with currents and, sea fleas now and, invasive species. And so things are changing, but we still, are worming quite often. We use a 1 ounce and 2 ounce inline weight that Mike Uremo over at Iowa Baits developed with us and kind of came up with a series of 6 foot leaders that, Ross had taught us how to tie. So we're taking all this information from other guys and kind of putting it to use. And so we pull a lot of worm harnesses like we did that one day with some inline spinners. And now we're doing a lot more with dipsy divers. A lot of our fish are deep. And, even in the championship, we were pulling dipsy divers that were, anywhere from 60 to 80 feet down over 90, 120, and so finding that thermocline, using our fish hawk, getting our temperature and our speed down, understanding where our equipment was. And those are all things that we'll talk about here this weekend. And, we were able to go out and put it hurting on them. We were catching 35, 40 fish in a 4 to 5 hour period, which gave us a selection that we were able to dig through and find some of those bigger fish. So, pulling worms on Lake Erie goes hand in hand with a lot of the old timers, but a lot of these new timers, I don't think they know what's good for them when it's the right temperature and the right speed. I mean, a low and slow program can sometimes get those bigger bites.
That's what I was going to interject there. Is I know how reluctant they are to fish worms on the East End here.
Yeah.
It's just been so good. And how do you attribute your success because of, you went to worms?
I think early on, that low and slow program, we were picking off fish and only catching maybe 10 to 12 fish a day. And now that the schools from Ohio, those great hatches in 15 and 16, and, all the talk from the DEC and the DNRs working together and tracking and understanding the populations, a lot of our mentality now is to go and pick through as many fish as possible. So that's why I think the crankbaits have taken over because it's a speed thing. At 2.5 miles an hour versus 1.5, you're covering twice as much distance. You're getting that extra mile per hour, which is going to cover and be over more fish. And, you can hopefully select those bigger fish out of there. But I think early on when we did go to those worms, it was one of those programs where we were keying on 3 or 4 fish on one rock. And if we made enough passes, we'd catch those 3 or 4 and we go to the next rock. And we'd catch those 3 or 4 and we could pick through those 7, 8, 9 pound fish on average, which would, obviously win any tournament on Lake Erie. If you get an 8 pound average, I mean, you're winning.
Sure.
And
so what was another old school tactic was tipping crankbaits with worms. Were you doing that?
In the championship, I can release that. Yes, I was. I was using a pinch crawler. I was pulling a lot of rippling redfins. My buddy Rob, over at Whack 'em Tackle, Rob Crow's been great in painting some of the concepts. I've had, great guys from the Western Basin like NFP Customs and even the Yali stuff. We pulled those for years. And, every once in a while, if things got a little common too.
You teeth on it?
We cut our teeth in the Finger Lakes. Yep. So Ethan and I fished a lot on Seneca Lake, but respectively have done a lot on Keuka. Canandaigua was just a hop, skip, and jump from my home, and then Cayuga as well.
So, which of those lakes actually helped you hone the walleye skills?
The rod in hand at Seneca Lake, I think, is it. We're throwing a lot of different tactics with, Mike's jigs over at Island Base. We've got a 3/8 ounce and a 1/4 ounce jig head that we developed. We actually nicknamed it the Perch Hunter. And having that rod in hand, fishing with, if you think about the Finger Lake, they're also like little rivers. And we do have a lot of current. And, based on where that current and wind set up, sometimes we do see the fish set up on structure. They can be up on top of it. They can be down below. And so I think that really hand-to-hand combat taught us a little bit more about how to actually catch these walleyes. And even over at Oneida Lake, following the guys over at the Lake Erie Diehards guys, those guys are, relentless on Wednesday nights and their working man's tournament and, fishing with Carl Elsner and Brian Hammond and to learn a little, not so, but from them.
Beautiful.
What do you feel is an advantage to using worm compared to your crankbait program?
The live bait thing is unmatched. I mean, if a fish can smell that, it can see it. A worm is not imitating a night crawler that the fish are feeding on. There's no 12-pack of Canadian crawlers running around the rocks and the fish are picking them off. I mean, this is an imitation bait. And even some of the best in the world have tried to imitate it in plastic, and they're doing a pretty good job. Our buddy Corey Sprengel over at Berkeley came out with a new crawler that's got a little bit of ribbon effect to it. It's a 7-inch and a 4-inch application that we've been kind of doing a little testing with. Finally got my hands on them, finally went on the market. But that imitation of that bait fish that's swimming, that dying action, anytime you can trigger a fish to bite, and then once he grabs that bait and feels that soft flesh, it's tough for him to let go compared to, and you'll see it even here in the tank. I mean, doing some of the seminars over at the Cleveland Boat Show, we saw, when they say the fish bite and won't let go, it's true. I mean, some of those plastics, they have those scents, and, some of that live bait is something those fish key on. And once they get that into their system, I think, it's tough to turn them off of it. So, yeah, I'd probably say that worms would be my number one. If I could fish a worm, throughout the entire country, that'd definitely be it.
There's a lot of people that are kind of adverse to it. They don't want to do it. So I guess that's the next question is, why wouldn't you want to do it?
It's tough. I mean, worms are dirty. So there's synthetics and things, boats cleans and, keeping a tight program. I know those are all, big parts of it. But, I would always have a 12-pack of worms on my boat either way. I mean, even with a jig, having a single jig with a worm, or, going back to our Mississippi experience this year, live bait was the way we caught most of our fish. Now, was there a crankbait bite? Absolutely. Was there a jig bite? I'm sure. Other places. We just found that live bait, having a worm on board, just is also a confidence factor, understanding that if we're going to pitch it in and we're watching active target, or we're looking at our sonar and there's a fish there, if he's not going to bite a worm, he's probably not going to eat anything, so again, a confidence factor as well.
Tell us a little bit about the harnesses you use on Lake Erie.
So I tie a 20 pound fluorocarbon. I use the Sunline FX and, or FC, excuse me. And I usually tie them with a treble. My first hook that I tie in is usually a 6. Sometimes I'll downsize to an 8. What I'm trying to keep is that action of the worm to keep it flowing. Some guys are actually using too big of a hook. And as I walk around the show and see some hooks, I just kind of put in my back pocket. Like, those are nice, but we're not catching salmon, right? These worms still need that action. So I like to have a smaller hook on the back, but I'm also using a octopus 1/0 or a 1 size hook, about 4 inches, or I like to use my hand width. And so as you start to tie these things, you kind of come up with a measurement, but about a 6 to 8 foot leader, depending on how long your rods are. I don't like them going too far. And then again, any sort of bead pattern that you're comfortable with. Obviously, purple on Lake Erie is, notorious. I don't tie that many different color applications. I have a few perch related, some goby related, some whites, some purples and greens, but I don't overdo it when it comes to bead patterns. I'm really selective on my blades. Blades on Lake Erie, we're fishing slow early season. I might even downsize to a 4 or 5 if the fish are, Jim Steele and I actually won a tournament over at the Conservation Club on New York. So we downsized our blades from 6s to 4s, and it made a big difference when the wind died. So I take more time, preparing my blades, not necessarily colors right away, but my size, the shape, and the action. Those are 3 big things for me before I even think about color. If a color does come up and, things are going well, and we start to catch some bigger fish or some fish are keying in on that, we'll then switch over. But I always like to start with my bead patterns first, because that's the most consistent. Then I'll go to my blade size, blade action, and then obviously, depending on my speeds, I'll change my blades accordingly.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What's the difference between the blades and what that harness is going to do when you start changing shapes?
Absolutely. Usually I start out with a small Colorado blade, a 4 to 6. 5's kind of that middle of the road. 6 is pretty large. 4 is a little small, but that Colorado blade's kind of like that teardrop shaped blade that has a nice little thump to it. When I'm pulling a lot slower, I might even grab, a Dutch fork plastic or poly blade that's going to be even lighter. So in any little current or any little motion, even at 0.8 to 1.2, I might pull that blade slower just to get some action to make it look like a swimming fish. From there, I might move up into a larger Colorado. Again, I'm not afraid to pull those blades even at 2 miles an hour on my dipsies. I know that I'm going 2 miles an hour down where my baits are because I'm, again, using my fish hawk. And that could mean, currents are changing. My water temperature is raised. So I might increase my size and bait fish. If I see that these fish are kicking out, larger perch or larger shad, or even this year we found them eating sheephead, I might bump up my blade size based on bait. And then last but not least, obviously one of my favorites is the willow. Higher speeds, 2.2 to 2.5, pulling them on my dipsies, maybe even throw an ITOI fly on there or something to give them a little more flash. But I'm a big proponent on those dipsies that run on those big willow blades.
So when I went with you, we ran a lot of lead core. You're telling me now you're kind of more transitioning towards the dipsies. How are you covering that water column?
Yeah, so, the lead core is it's an animal. It's a tool. It works in certain applications. There's certain days that those fish want that bait further away from the boat, or they want that undulation of that lead core and what it's producing and providing. But, we were talking efficiencies in this championship. And so, having 2 dipsy divers where I can easily let out 60, 80, 100 feet very quickly and have a rod in hand and not have to grab a board, pull in my 10 colors of lead, finally get to the to the fish, put it back out. I wasn't cycling fish to my liking fast enough. Mm-hmm. And so the dipsies were a great way, to understand, not only where the fish were in that water column, because I would target them, obviously 3 to 5 feet, maybe above them, and have them come up and hit it. But I could drive faster and turn quicker. So as soon as I had a school going, it wasn't like I had to go reel all of those big boards in with 300 lines out, grab, turn. I had those dipsies in, and we could really work efficiently.
So less is more.
In this case, and that even goes back to some of my salmon days. I used to, work with a couple guys as a deckhand back in the college days. And, I went out with Matt Yablonsky, and he was on here the other day. And it's like, 4 rods is all he needs to catch 16 fish in 20 minutes. I mean, the guy understands that. And I think less is more. Having a few less rods to manage, you can also monitor them. If you get a junk fish, a white bass, a sheephead, you can take care of it quickly, get your bait fishing, as fast as possible. So I think it's definitely an efficient way of fishing.
Are you running traditional diver lengths, or are you running slide divers?
Again, some of the local guys took me into another dimension by adding a trick to it. Specifically, I actually take my dipsy diver and I grab one of the OR16 red clips from Offshore Tackle, and I make my own slide diver. With the bite that the walleyes have compared to a salmon is not as violent. And I feel like, as I can control that length, some days they want it 30 feet away, like a slide diver would be. Mm-hmm. Some days they want it 6 feet away. The other thing is just efficiency when netting a fish with a dipsy diver. Sure. If you have a 6 to 10 foot leader and whoever's handling the net can't get to the back of the boat to scoop that while the other guy's in the front of the net, or in front of the boat, with that dipsy diver dangling from his rod tip, I just find it easier to disengage that clipped on dipsy diver, set it in the boat, and then it's just them and the fish for the next 30 feet. And so we developed a little bit. We've got that going to be in our school this weekend. But that came from Jim Steele over at Innovative Outdoors. He taught us that years ago right here at this clinic when I was just a young pup learning how to fish.
Yeah, that's cool. And now you're teaching in the walleye school.
Yeah, and I don't want to say I stole that tactic, but it's been working so well. And I always reference that he taught me that years ago. And now we're teaching the big Eastern Basin Walleye School. We got Ali Shakur and Donnie Ruppert and Lance Valentine's put together quite the curriculum. And I'm excited to go, check out the room and get started tonight from 6 to 8. We got a little social, and, it's just something that I've always dreamed of doing, is passing on, a little bit of information that we've collected over the years so we can help someone else beat the fish. And that was, something that I took this year is everybody's like, well, you didn't beat this guy or you didn't beat that guy. And it's like, well, okay, guys, we're not out to beat each other. We're here to beat the fish.
That's exactly
And we
right.
learned that from Bob Henton since
exactly
passed this last April. And, he taught us so much about, hey, did you get those fish today? And I'm like, well, yeah, we got them. Well, how good you get them? And that was the question rather than, well, did you go over and did you beat Jimmy? or did you go over? Did you beat Chris? Did you beat Donnie? No, it wasn't about who did you beat. It was, did you beat the fish better than us? And so I think as a fishing community, we have to go back and remember, with all the things that are going on in the world, it's not us against each other. It's us against the fish,
For sure.
So one of the things that you use on your boat, and we're here with a bunch of salmon guys, and the salmon guys are using the X4, X4D.
Yep.
But one of the tools you use on your boat, I think this is something that if people are watching that are just kind of getting started, or maybe they've got a multi-species boat, is the X2. So can you talk about how that X2 works into your game when you're out on Lake Erie?
Yeah, with that portability of the X2, it's great because I'm able to take that application of the probe. I can put it with I actually use a torpedo 12-ounce musky weight because it tracks really nicely. And so I'll throw that on the bottom of my probe, and I'll actually use my short rod that I got right from Fish Hawk. And the nice thing about it, it's up away from everything that's in the back. Because I'm netting fish and because I'm fishing, everything towards the back, my unit is portable where I can actually put, the transducer and the probe right in the water, right at the cockpit of the captain. So, running the boat, having a crew of 2 or 3 guys, depending on, who's in our boat, I'm able to monitor. I can see that screen. I know what my temperature is. I know what my speed is. And so having that portability, I can move it. I can change it. I can rip it up, as fast as I can. It's not stuck, and I don't have to run a downrigger. And so that's the cool thing about our Ranger 621 is we don't have a downrigger. Are they nice to have? They're great for salmon. Some guys do really well with them on the walleye world. But for us, because I'm some kind of a run and gun fishing captain, and I love that transferability of going from one spot to another very quickly and being efficient, having that X2 has really changed the game.
So you've got that information, but when you're out on the Mississippi River where you're not going to use it, it's out of your way. You don't have to worry about, hitting the deucer somewhere. You don't have to worry about having that display on your console. You just take it right off.
Exactly. And if you're a guy that's going to go and explore new places and new lakes, and you're able to just monitor and adjust based on the depth, I can even see that weight and see that probe on my graph because I do have a through hull transducer. I'm constantly monitoring that line to make sure that I'm not in structure, not in rocks. And it's been astronomical to find the actual difference of current. The shallower I get, the more current sometimes I'm finding. You're like, well, that's a deep water application. You can't start that thing till 50 feet down. And I found 30 feet in sometimes has more current than 50 feet does. Right. And so that's also taught me a little bit more about paying attention to speeds and lure speeds, especially when we're after those big fish shallow with our worms.
Vince, do you have anything for Craig?
I think it's been fascinating, the similarities in the tournament game. I mean, for sure, it is you against the fish. And then the cream will rise to the top. And you fall where you do, but it is a competition against the fish, and every day. I mean, and that's what it is. And sounds very similar. As soon as you think you know it all, you get humbled. I mean, you're always learning. And these fish only survive because they adapt and change. So it's a beautiful thing, man. So when you were talking about the Finger Lakes, you were walleye fishing?
There's a few walleyes around with Honeyway Lake.
Yep.
Home of Doc's Tackle, one of our big sponsors over here that's at the show. I mean, great walleye fishing in there. It's actually gotten better over the last couple of years. Working your way over to, actually, there's a little problem over at Skinny Atlas. Someone had released some walleyes, and the DEC has said there's really, no limit time of year. So, so we don't know what's going on over there, but some great walleyes to be caught there. Otisco's got some great weedy walleyes. Mm-hmm. But Cuca's, unfortunately, found 5 or 6 here in the last couple of years. Have kind of leaked into our Cuca Lake, but definitely not in Seneca. Haven't seen many, although I did hear there's some on the south end of Cayuga. So, but there's a few around. But, if we're going to travel, it's an hour and a half either Oneida or an hour and a half over here to Buffalo.
So, growing up, I was very young when I got in the salmon game, but we always heard Canisius had big fish, but very, very challenging.
So, it's funny to see them spawn in the springtime at the south end and get all the videos. The guys are like, well, why aren't you fishing Canisius? They're a tough tiger to tame over there. They can be caught. There were a few night tournaments that I participated a few years back in May, and some guys came up with some wallop 8-9 pounders, and I know some guys that have caught some. I tend not to target that lake as much just with my time frame of schedule, but that's definitely a place I'd like to explore a little bit more.
Still alewives in there?
Yes, there are. Yep, a lot of tiger muskies, a lot of big smallmouth, a lot of big largemouth as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So good stuff, Craig. If people want to learn more about you or find out or get in touch with you, how do they do it?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Craig Sleeman Fishing and also on Facebook. You can look us up there and shoot us a message. We'd love to answer any questions about products, about the X2, and even love to take you fishing over here lake here. It's pretty much wall as we slip too.
Yeah, it was your teacher, so you know how to teach. So if somebody wants to learn how to do this, you're a good guy to go out with.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. I've set up quite a few educational tours already this year, and we even sold a gift certificate for Christmas this winter, and on 2 lessons with a couple different captains. So we're putting together a nice little package, and I'm just tickled to death to be here with Lance and Ali, because I think they bring the game when it comes to really teaching fishing. So I'm really looking forward to hanging out with them this weekend.
Very good, Vince. I appreciate you hanging out with us today.
No problem.
2 hours sitting here in the co-captain's chair with me.
It's been a wide variety of topics. Man. We were on Standard Rock and in the North Shore of Minnesota.
Right.
We went over to, they want to put windmills in our precious Great Lakes.
Yeah.
No way. And of course, it's the same thing, just different species.
Yeah. I got done booking your segment. I'm like, that's going to be quite a segment, because we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff with Vince this afternoon. So it was good for you to come in and really roll with the punches, because we had a lot of things going on. So appreciate you coming on with us here and co-hosting with us today. I want to find out about you.
Thrill Seekers. At the show here. I'm going to be busy, real busy a little bit after, and we'll be back Sunday morning too.
Yeah, Vince with Thrill Seeker up in Olcott, New York. If you want to catch some great fish, he's the guy to go with, and he's on them. Just fun to see what you got going on Facebook too. You're always sharing pictures of what's going on. Vince is on the fish. So I just want to thank everybody for watching today. And if you're listening on the podcast later on, we'll be putting these segments out on the podcast throughout the year. We'll chop up these videos as well and put them on YouTube. So a lot of new stuff coming out of the show. Just appreciate everybody joining us, and especially appreciate our guests for taking time out and hanging out with us and sharing your information. So we'll be back on at 6 o'clock Eastern. Pete Alex is going to be co-hosting that segment, so that should be fun as well. We'll see you guys here in a few hours. Take care.